Welcome to Inner Voice of Knowing podcast. I'm Kay Doran, a shamanic leadership coach and healer, guiding you through life with a foot in both worlds. When you understand the terrain of the inner landscapes, the mental, emotional, spiritual, and energetic, you will become the leader within your physical life, both personally and professionally. After all, the power of change is in your hands. Let's get this journey started. Welcome everybody back to Inner Voice of Knowing podcast. I'm always thrilled, of course, with every guest that I have, but I'm really keen to introduce you to Princeton Clark, living in Arizona currently, has an amazing story. I've been watching and interacting with Princeton for probably a few years now, and watching the most and witnessing the most beautiful shift that's also happening for a lot of people. So you've got an amazing backstory, and you've worked with people like Tony Robbins, and you've been a Southern Baptist minister. And let me hand the mic over to you, Princeton, and no one can tell your story better than you can, but welcome. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to, I know we've connected a few times, but to be connecting with you and then being able to share in the space, I just honor it. So thank you so much. My story is a very unique one. Well, I always say we all have very unique stories because none of us have ever walked the same path. But unique for me, it was a special path, as I can say now. But a lot of the times, people see the accolades. He's worked with Tony Robbins, bestselling author, all these things. And those are just roles that I've been able to play in the avatar of this person everybody sees as Princeton. But, on this journey of my life, like many, I started off facing some very challenging moments in my life. And I wasn't, let's say it this way, I wasn't always who I am now and didn't have the awareness that I have now. But, growing up, yes, I grew up in Virginia, small town called Brookneal, Virginia, and it's in the Bible Belt. I grew up Southern Baptist, and, every Sunday, hellfire and brimstone while talking about this great love, but I never really saw that great love. So as I got older, I was abused mentally, physically, verbally, and emotionally growing up. And, I'm going to try to condense for the sake of time to honor the space.
That seems, sorry to interrupt you, Princeton, but that seems to actually be quite a theme for backstories, from people like where you come from. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, you definitely hear it a lot coming from those spaces, especially when you're raised. And a lot of the philosophy around raising children is spare the rod, spoil the child. And so the reason I was able to let it go and even heal through it later in life was I realized that people only knew what they knew. They didn't know. And back in that time, it was quote unquote tough love. And, we were growing up in completely different times too. Often I'll tell people, because they ask me, how did you forgive the people that abused you and, being molested and all those things? And I said, because I realized later in my life, hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
And a lot of the times being able to love yourself enough to let it go, because ultimately the forgiveness is for you. It gives you the ability to see where other people have been hurting too, or programmed to respond a certain way. But I say, growing up in that space and growing up Southern Baptist, we didn't see it as abuse, and I remember I didn't see it as abuse even after being molested. Like, I thought it was normal because I had never seen anything different. I just thought this is life and these things happen. And it wasn't until I was about 16 years old, I was sitting at my grandmother's house, and there was this old talk show called the Phil Donahue Talk Show. And he was interviewing, these I say young men now, but he was older than me. He was in his 20s, and the episode was on victims of abuse and domestic violence. And there was a young guy on there in his 20s, and he was sharing his story, and it was practically identical to mine as far as what he experienced.
Chills.
And I remember sitting there, and I'm supposed to be doing my homework. I'm next to the TV. I'm writing my girlfriend at the time a little love letter. And I start hearing this young man's story, and I remember my face got hot, my ears got hot. And at that moment, that was probably the first time in my life that I felt what I would call rage.
Wow.
And I had no space to let it out. I had no space to let it out because how can I talk about what I'm now experiencing? Yes, it's on TV, but the people that hurt me, as I would say then, hurt me the most were family members. And now you're afraid, if I speak up, is it going to affect my family? How is it going to affect my family, especially with the molestation stuff? Because that was a cousin. And long story short, that just throughout school, I ended up struggling with deep depression. I learned very early to wear masks, and I had a
Mm.
mask for every situation. And I could smile and people would see, they would think, Princeton's so fun, like he makes everybody laugh. But what they didn't see is how I cried myself to sleep every single night.
The sad part about that story, Princeton, which is the same for so many, is it just seemed normal
Hmm.
until you have that reflection back to you going, no, this is not normal. This is not love. This is not safety. And I can
Hmm.
only imagine the weight of that moment as
Yeah.
all of that reality cracks open for you. Um, yeah. And then the pain that just gets locked away. And as you say, lying in bed, crying yourself to sleep and then putting on these masks, more than what many have to wear just to get through the day.
Hmm.
Wow.
Especially being raised as a young man, and at that time you're taught to be strong, and to cry is weak, and you to have a full human experience was programmed out of us. It was just like, you got to be strong, toughen up,
Yeah.
pull up your bootstraps and keep moving. You didn't have time to process emotion because certain types of emotion like that was considered weak. And so I always wanted to be strong. I always wanted my dad and the men in my life to be proud of me. And you push so much down. And I think this is a big problem with a lot of men, a big issue with a lot of men in society and women. Because if you grow up in a very masculine, and we're not just talking gender, but if you grow
Yeah.
up in a very masculine environment, there's not a lot of space to express your emotions. You're looked at as a brat or spoiled, or, you just want to have your way. And so it shows up in many different ways. And that was another way that as I got older, I started seeing like, this isn't just a man thing, though men deal with it in a different way. Women also deal with it as well if they grow up in a very masculine, energy dominated home.
Well, this is really highlighting why I felt so compelled to bring the masculine voice into inner voice of knowing, because you can be incredibly masculine, but have this vulnerability, this fragility. And I think it's really powerful for men to start speaking about. And, it's interesting what you were saying then, because as a child, I grew up, I developed a pattern where I created this fight. I'm just as strong as the men.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just as tough. I was sort of trying to constantly prove my masculinity in a way, even though, I'm the female, and I had to break all of that down. But so again, thank you for being here and sharing this and talking about these subjects, because it's powerful and it's important, and it's part of being, the strong masculine, the divine masculine, for a lack of a better word.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I grew up with some very strong women as
Yeah.
well that process, but I think a lot of that happened through the feminist movement,
Yeah.
and it became something that it was never meant to become.
Mm-hmm.
And women fighting to find their place amongst men because they were tired of being pushed down, tired of getting less, tired of not being acknowledged for their strengths, tired. They were just tired. And then they had to take on so much masculine energy just to move forward, to progress. But I feel like a lot of women, especially in that time, got stuck in that masculine energy.
Yeah.
And now it's like a lot of us are waking up. And I think it is very important for men to acknowledge not only what they're doing, and through our ability to be vulnerable, we also are now able to create space for those women as well, whether they're friendships, family members, whoever. We're now able to show up in that vulnerability and say it's okay number one, not to be okay sometimes. It's
Yes.
okay to be with yourself and it's okay to be vulnerable. And I personally believe that it takes more strength to be soft and to be vulnerable than it does to appear strong, like you got it all together. And I know that that's one of the biggest things on my own spiritual journey that has given me the power and the prowess to navigate it and really listen to my own inner knowing. Because if I was so in my head and constantly trying to figure out how I can do it and how I could make it happen, it's pulling me away from that noise. And if you do that for too long, it gets so loud that you don't even hear yourself anymore. And that's where the disconnect happens.
Yeah. You're drowned out. And I learned too through experience, vulnerability is powerful.
Mhm.
And relearning that. So, so you've gone through all of this, you're with your grandmother, you've had this realization, you sort of develop all these masks, cry yourself to sleep at night. Where do you go from there, Princeton?
Through a long, dark night of the soul is where I went from there because, after, all that stuff happened, like I said, the realization of what had happened and the injustice of it didn't hit until 16. I didn't really have but one outlet in high school, and that was track. I was a tremendous athlete. I played football, little league all the way through high school, but I never got along with the football coach in high school because it's almost like he had favorites, and I
Yeah.
knew that I was better than some of the other players, but I was also smaller at the time. So then going through that phase of constantly being looked over and feeling like you got to prove yourself in that space, I said, you know what, screw this. I'm going to start running track. And I started finding confidence and belief in myself when I started running track. And I did really well, and I started working out, and that was a great space, but that was really the only outlet in that season of my life. I was a tremendous athlete, pretty much any all around athlete, whatever sport I played. But with the depression and everything that would hit, because even with sports, it became a mask. It's like, I'm great in this aspect of my life, but
Yeah.
over here, mentally, emotionally, physically, I'm warring through things that nobody realizes that I'm warring with. And long story short, it ended up bringing me to this point where I barely ended up graduating high school. I lost opportunities to go D1 in track, to play divisional league, to run divisionally at a high level in track. And once I graduated, I ended up in gang related activity, fighting all the time. I was on drugs and it just went dark from there. I was an alcoholic before I was 21. By the time I was 21, I drank so bad that I had bleeding ulcers and I would literally throw up blood. And, I
Yeah.
had met a high school sweetheart who is the mother of my oldest kids now. We ended up getting married when I was 21. She was 19. And I remember thinking at that time, I want to give my kids the love that I never had. I always wanted to be a father. I always knew that I was going to be a father. And my kids to this day are my best friends and they have been my greatest teachers next to my own spirit. But throughout that experience, I reached this point getting married and then a lot of her trauma coming. I realize now a lot of how we bonded was a trauma bond,
Yes.
and we connected on the basis of our pain and we just wanted to be there for each other. But when we got married and we were in close proximity, all of it came up because people that close to you become the most powerful mirror in your life. And so we had one son, a daughter on the way when we got married. And let's just say 3 years into it, it came to such a head. And I'm still out there fighting all the time. I'm so angry. And I remember 6 weeks prior to this particular moment I'm about to mention, my mom had come to me and she was like, Princeton, you need to get back in the church and give your life to Jesus and God, or you're going to end up dead or in jail. And I looked her in her eyes and I said, if one more person says something to me about God or Jesus, I'm going to kill him. And I
Wow.
meant it. I had no remorse. At that point, I was so angry. My kids never saw that version of me because I never brought it home. But if you cross me, I literally had the mentality that it's me against the world. You look at me wrong, there's going to be a problem. You do
So you
something
were
that I don't
angry
like.
with people and angry with God,
Right,
angry at the
right.
world.
I didn't believe anything higher than myself at that point. I was
Yeah.
pretty much agnostic, atheist, whatever you want to call it. Like, I did not believe anything higher than myself. And I just felt alone. And I remember sitting in my car one night just thinking, I'm done. I'm done. I'm tired of
Mm.
fighting. Like, I just remember it felt like I couldn't breathe. Everything was tight from the bottom of my neck all the way down to my upper or lower abdomen. Everything just felt tight and there was just pressure and just heat all around me. And I said, I'm done. I'm done fighting. You know, my kids will be better off when I'm gone. I'm no good for them. I'm no good as a husband. And I remember sitting there that night, and it's crazy because this peace came over me. And, you know, I used to say I had an uncle that had tried to take his own life, or he did take his own life rather. And I remember thinking that was so selfish. Nobody knew that he was going through what he was going through, but I
Yeah.
still remember thinking that was so selfish. But in this moment, I experienced a peace. Like I was so at peace, like I'm ready to go. And I understand where people have to get to mentally, emotionally, physically within their energy in their body to get to that point where you feel like that is the only way.
Yes.
And so sitting in my car that night, I took my gun and I put it to my temple and I took one last breath and I pulled the trigger and the gun misfired.
Oh,
And every time I think about it, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful because I look back on that moment and I remember just when they say your life flashes before your eyes, it's almost like it plays through like this quick movie. And it's like
mm,
time doesn't exist anymore. And you're just looking around and you realize, well, the realization that came to me was you're not where you are because of what happened to you. You're where you are because of how you chose to respond to it. You know, as a child, I couldn't control the environments I put myself in. I couldn't control what the adults, you know, how the adults projected their energy over me
yeah.
and their manipulations over me. I couldn't control that. But as an adult, I realized that I was still feeding into what had happened and it wasn't happening anymore, but I was giving it so much power. And I had given the lies that I had told myself about it so much power. And I had given the fear that I would never be good enough, never amount to anything. I had fed all of these things and gave them so much power that I had created this personified idea of Princeton that I hated. And I realized that my projection on the world, I hate people was really me saying, I hate myself.
Where do you feel, Princeton, those insights were coming from?
I mean, now, of course, I say, you know, the divine, you know, some may say God, spirit, source, universe. I say the finite mind can't even begin to comprehend the infinite,
Yeah.
you know, but they were coming to me. And
Yeah.
I say all the time, your experience may be your experience, but I know what happened for me. And I think soulfully, there was a part of me that always knew. I think a part of us, when we incarnate, a part of us always knows what's right for us. But again, we get lost in the programming, we get lost in the noise.
Hmm.
And because of the very nature of our power as creators and how we're able to utilize and operate in different energies and at different frequencies, we create entire reality. Sometimes it's only inward, and we're the only people that can see the world through the lens of that reality. And it starts to flow over into what we're experiencing externally. But I know for a fact that realization, that was probably one of the greatest epiphanies in my life at that time. But because what it showed me was, or the moment, let me say it this way, the moment that it brought me into was if I had the power to create the mess of a life that I hated, how much more power did I really have if I started living like I gave a damn? If I started living like I love me, I was ready to take my own life. But what if I decide to give myself life?
Mm.
And you know, keep in mind, I didn't even know what this looked like, but at the same time, the sequences of events that had to take place. This gun that I had was not known to be a gun that misfired. Not to mention, I had shot that gun so many times that at this moment, when I would go to make this decision, that would be the bullet that would be in the chamber that would misfire. You know, and I just looked at the sequence of events that had happened, and I was like, this was not a mistake. I knew it wasn't. And I remember,
Yeah.
again, growing up in the Bible Belt, I said, I went out and this peace just came over me. And the only other person's story that I've ever read that I feel like really relates to what I've experienced, I'm sure there's others, but personally, the only story I've ever read is the story of Eckhart Tolle. I believe it's in The Power of Now, where he shares his experience and he talks about how waking up and getting out of the floor, like the world seemed brighter.
Yeah.
It was as if he was seeing the world and living for the first time. And that's really what it felt like to me. That week, I quit drinking cold turkey. I quit using drugs cold turkey. And I didn't know, again, growing up in the Bible Belt, all I knew was the Bible, metaphysics, energy work, all this, that, or the other. I didn't know anything about that. And so what I decided to do was not go back to church. I decided there's got to be some truth. I'm going to go buy a Bible. And I ended up buying a Bible, a Strong's Exhaustive Concordance with the Hebrew, Greek, and the Aramaic. And then I bought a student Bible, NIV, and I studied the Bible from beginning to end for an entire year. I isolated myself from relationships that didn't bring me joy. I separated from a lot of people, even family that I felt like weren't good for me at the state that I was in. And I just went deep into seeking. And I remember getting home before I started and saying, God, Spirit, whatever the hell you are, my exact words,
Yeah.
God, Spirit, whatever the hell you are, if you're real, show me. Show me.
Now,
Because if
there's
you
a
don't
power
show me, I
statement
won't
and an
move.
invocation if I've ever heard one. Yeah.
But I wanted it. I was like, okay, clearly something's happening. I'm not going to listen to another man. If you're real and your word is powerful and your word is true, based on what I know at this point, you speak to me and you show me, because if you don't, I won't move. I'm not going back to a building to listen to a man who's never been the example of what you say is possible through my life. And so you show me. And through that year, I studied, and of course you see these other stories and you can see the correlations in a lot of things symbolically, and I started seeing symbols and everything. I started having visions, and it was just one of the most beautiful times. But I remember getting to the story of Jesus after he's been crucified. He's hanging on the cross, and this is probably one of the most powerful messages that ever hit my soul, or one of the most powerful moments I've ever experienced at that time, and probably since that time. But, you hear the story of how he's beaten beyond recognition, nailed to the wood. He's hanging up there. Everybody's turned their backs on him. The people that loved him, the people, who were once walking with him. And now they're all saying, crucify him, crucify him.
Yeah.
He's feeling pain mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, on every level. And still he has the ability to love to such a degree that he looks out over them and he says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I remember, I get chills now even saying it, but I remember reading that. And I thought to myself, I want to be able to love like that. If I can't love like that, I don't want to live anymore. And from that day, it was not me seeking religion. It wasn't me seeking, what man thought. I was only seeking love.
Yeah.
And I started seeing even challenges in my life when it came to different people, different circumstances. I would always say, this is offering me an opportunity to love. How can I love more deeply? And I also started realizing that every aspect of my life was mirroring something to me about me.
Yes.
And in order to love them, I had to look at these opportunities through a different lens. And I had to ask myself, what is being challenged in me that is preventing me from loving in this moment, that is preventing me from having joy in this moment, that is preventing me from having peace in this moment? Because as an adult, nobody's controlling my thoughts, my actions, and my words anymore. I am in full control, And so, again, studying the original language, I ended up going back to school and I got a bachelor's in biblical studies and Eastern religion. And then you really start realizing that so much of what's being taught is taught wrong in the religious sector. And so I decided I'm going to become a pastor. And but I wanted to become a pastor like, it was more like Neo in the Matrix. Like, I'm going in there and I'm going to wake people up. But as you can imagine, that didn't go so well. I became a minister, and then you get into the space. I ended up navigating out of Southern Baptist into non-denominational. And I became a minister, a non-denominational minister. And you're working under these men. And it's like, I'm your spiritual father now. I'm your spiritual father. God gives me the message for you. And
Hierarchy.
I was like, I didn't receive the message in a building. And what I remember telling one of the spiritual leaders or pastors at that time, I said, if I didn't receive the message from you, why do I need to listen to you? Because you weren't there when my life changed. You weren't there when the deepest epiphanies that caused me to course correct came. Most of the men in my life told me I would be worthless and I would never achieve anything, you
Mm.
know, and it was always like they were threatened by me because I was literally journaling at this time. And there were times where I would journal and I always dated my journals, but I would get messages and then go to church on Sunday and I'd be sitting there and he's preaching exactly what I wrote down, but it's missing pieces. And so I would try to talk to them and explain to them, listen, I know what you were saying. The voice is the message is definitely coming to you, but this is what I wrote literally on Monday, almost a whole week from today. And this was the other part of it. And to try to have a conversation, and they would just say things like, you know, God didn't come to me. If God put me in position over you, you're serving under me. And
That would have
after a
been
while,
so threatening to them.
right,
And I know that
right.
there have been times in my life where, you know, because I've got that very powerful, strong, direct connection and I've had it all my life. So I've had similar moments where it's like all these bits are missing. And I've had, you know, people turn up at the door, you know, religious people, and then I've tried to converse with them. But any time that I'm actually coming back with what I know, it's just like, you know, they want to slam the door on me and run. So there wasn't that open flow of ideas. It was that way or no way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was, I mean, it was a beautiful experience. You know, I ended up pastoring, and I always say every experience, people ask me all the time, like, how can you say that was all a gift and it was a beautiful experience? And I say, because it was a part of my life path curriculum. It was a part of my preparation. It was a part of the process that led me to trusting myself so deeply
Yeah.
that I didn't need the external validation. I didn't need the applause. I didn't need any of that. And, you know, I remember the last message that I preached it and it was on the lame man by the pool of Bethesda. You know, based on the biblical story, every day it was said that if the spirit came and troubled the water while you were laying by the pool, you would be healed. Where there was a lame man who would have people pick him up, carry him in his bed, lay him by the pool every single day. And one day Jesus walks past this man and he says, will you be made whole? He simply asks the question, will you be made whole? And this man says, yes, yes, you know, thinking Jesus is going to heal me now. And Jesus looks at him and says, well, take up your bed and walk. Because what most people don't realize is in most cases where you see where it says Jesus healed someone, it doesn't say, or where, how people use it, you know, well, Jesus healed this person, Jesus healed that person. If you read closely, it says that he would say to them, by your faith, you have been made whole.
Yeah.
By your belief, you have been made whole. You know, he never said, I've done this for you. I've done this. Even if we use the example of Lazarus coming out of the tomb, he said, you know, let the power, essentially he's talking to God. He says, let your power be known, you know, and as a result, he calls Lazarus forward. He never did that. He never took that into himself to say, I did anything. You know, he never even wanted to be called good. He was asked, you know, he asked the question, why do you call me good? He said, none are good but God, you know, the spirit, the divine, you know. And so reading stuff like that, using that story of the lame man, I told them, I said, you are all like the lame man by the pool of Bethesda. You come in and week out, waiting for something to trouble the water, waiting for pastor to give you a message so that you can have your healing, not realizing that you are already healed if you can believe it. This entire book, as I held the Bible up, I said, this entire book can be summed up into one word, and that's a universal word, and that word is love. The reason you do not receive your healing is because you feel afraid of the responsibility of what comes with it. Because if I love myself, I can't make excuses anymore. If I love myself, I can't play the woe is me card anymore. If I love myself, I have to love myself to take the steps to be the best version of me because I've been given the breath and the opportunity. And I'm so grateful and I have reverence for this breath. And because I love me, I am going to show up daily being the best of me. I'm not going to make room for anything else. And I said, you come to this place and this building is nothing more than a hospital to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, this will be my last message. And I threw the Bible across the room. So as you can imagine, everybody was like, you know, the gas
Stop.
filled the room, you know,
Yeah.
and because when my life changed, and I would often say, in the Bible, they didn't have a Bible. In that time, you read even with the prophets or the stories, what have you, a voice spoke to them, a message came to them. We are all connected. We
Yes.
are all connected. There's always the inner knowing. But until we take the responsibility and own the ability to respond to that inner knowing, to listen to that inner knowing, and give ourselves space to be peaceful, because when my life changed, that's what I had to do. I had to get away from the noise. I had to get away from what didn't serve me. I had to get away from what was a constant reminder of what was bringing me down. And sure, there was a process to that. Sure, I still had to encounter some of those moments, because a part of this reality was a reality that I had created. And in certain instances, it was family, and so family get-togethers, of course, you're going to be reminded of some things, but I had to spend more time in silence than I did in the noise that I couldn't control.
But isn't it
And so,
interesting, Princeton, because, aligning with love, there are so many people that I've spoken to, sort of, I suppose, in the spiritual community that want this sort of euphoria, but it's in those moments that the power of love brought into it is powerful. When we're beating up on ourselves, when we're pointing the finger at someone else, when we're feeling like the victim, they're our greatest opportunities to exercise love.
100%, 100%. That's why I say the greatest message I ever received, or the greatest urge or knowing that I ever received, was that type of love was possible. That could change anything, the love and the peace that surpasses all understanding. And so it's like, as you enter that and you learn to really navigate the journey from that space, that's where the magic is, because that's where the gratitude is found. And the more you can surrender to that gratitude in each moment, the more you learn to love and honor each moment. And the more you learn to love and honor each moment, of course, you want to have people around you. You want to get people around you that are also on the journey, that can create spaces for you to talk things out, because it is a lot more difficult, I will say, if you're doing it alone. But that's why you have people like yourself, people like me, and so many others on the planet. You have to be diligent. At that time in my life, I didn't have a lot of people around me, but what I did have was books. And I remember my grandmother saying to me at one point when I was really young, she said, if you want to hide something from a man, put it in a book. And I was so hungry that I would go to Barnes and Noble, and I was reading books on conscious psychology, human motivations, emotional intelligence, and spirituality, and metaphysics, and energy work. And I started studying astral projection, and I'm literally reading all of these things because there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
Anything you want to know having to do with some aspect of life can be found in a book. But ultimately, the most valuable pieces of information that you will ever find are the pieces of information that lead you back to you.
Absolutely. And when you're seeking that support, it's interesting. My podcast that's come out today is also about that, that also that discernment. You need that person that's not wearing a false cloak, and you'll always know them because they will keep guiding you back to you with love, with support, and not elevating themselves in the process. That's why I always say, the best coach, the best healer, the best mentor, we're really just guides that know the terrain because we've walked that terrain. And it's like, you know what, you have to walk this, but let me show you the way. But you have to do it. And that's why I call it the courageous path, because it takes courage first. And to me, the confidence comes on the other side of that courage in actually walking through those inner landscapes. And I think your message has been so powerful because it is about you went in, you bought the Bibles, you didn't go out to church, you went in and you did your invocation, as I call it. And when you invoke something, you're inviting it in, and God comes in and answers. But then you've also done that external, research through the books, etc. But to me, it's about then reading that and then working it into your life to know whether it's of truth for you.
And one thing that I didn't say about
integrative process.
Yeah, it's definitely an integrative process because the one thing that I didn't say was how I would choose books that I read. I literally would go into Barnes and Noble and I would, before I would even go in, I would say, I would close my eyes and say, give me what's for me today.
Yeah.
And when I would walk down the aisle, I would close my eyes and I would put my hand on the books and I would just walk until I felt stop. Like it was
Mm.
like in my solar plexus, I just felt stop.
Yeah.
And every time my hand would be on a book, and every time it never failed, I'd pull this book out and I just open it up and I would start reading, and it would be speaking exactly to what I was seeking. And so I didn't go in just because someone said, "Oh, you should read this book. Oh, you
Yeah.
should really read this book." It was never about absorbing a bunch of information for me. It was about really, again, listening to that inner voice and saying, guide me to what's for me, knowing that that inner voice is always going to lead me. And I was sharpening, not even realizing at the time, I was sharpening that discernment. I was sharpening that intuition. But
Yeah.
I think for me, the reason it was so easy is because going through the experience or growing through the experience that I had had, when you come to a point where you're ready to just take your life, you're rock bottom, like really rock bottom. So when you come out, you're not really looking for anything external. There's really not a lot of noise following that. All you can do is go up. And so once I started experiencing the spiritual experiences that I was having, getting messages, having visions, and then they would
Yeah.
happen, like all these things started happening, I became hungry for that. And I was afraid of losing that. And so I was like, okay, how many different ways can I sharpen this?
Yeah.
Because I want to see how deep it really goes. And so I would really put things into practice. And so this is what I challenge anyone to do if you're on that spiritual journey right now and you're like, man, I wish I could feel that way. I wish I could connect that way. You're already connecting that way. You just don't realize it. You're already connecting. And we all have different clair skills, as I call them. We're all
Yeah.
tuning in different ways. We all have extrasensory perception, but we've been so through the educational system, through the governmental system, through the social systems, we've been so numbed
Mm.
to what we are. And this is another reason why we have to go through those moments of peace. And I was so sick and tired of it that I learned later I didn't have to do it. But in the beginning, you talk about really wanting it. I literally prayed this prayer: God, spirit source, whatever you are, take me through whatever hell you have to take me through to make me the man I was created to be. I was like, whatever you got to take me through. Now, this
Turning
was
coal into the diamond, Princeton,
Yes, yes. I was ready for it. But I will say that that was 2003 when I first prayed that prayer. And for years I prayed it. And I remember 2000 and around 2015, 2014, I was sitting in my car going through another dark night of the soul. And once again, I'm praying this prayer. And the message just came to me: you don't have to pray to go through hell to be what you already know you've
Yeah.
been called to be. You already know that you are a powerful creator. You already know that whatever you think, speak, or however you respond is creating a reality. If you have a vision for what's possible for you, you don't have to pray to go through hell to manifest that vision. You simply must become the version of you capable of operating in that vision, and the vision manifests as a byproduct. And so I realized that a part of that, coming from the religious background, was feeling like I had to go through torture and I had to go
Had
through
to
hell to
suffer.
be worthy.
Yeah.
Right. And that's when I realized, wait, I don't have to suffer. I have to surrender.
Yes.
I have to
Yeah.
surrender.
Yeah. So Princeton, people are just going to have to listen to this and listen to it and stop. And there's so much to really land. But you've had your moment. You've tossed the Bible. Where did life take you then?
Well, following that, I know, again, this is when I really started diving deeper into spirituality and metaphysics and quote unquote taking it to the world. I wanted to be able to go into any space. And I remember thinking to myself one day reading at Barnes and Noble, I don't want to be a one-dimensional leader if I am a multidimensional creator. I want to be a multidimensional leader, which means no matter what space I am allowed to go in or presented the opportunity to go in, I want to be able to have impact.
Yeah.
And so at this point, some of my first mentors were Zig Ziglar, Dr. Wayne Dyer, Les Brown, and later on, 2005 was when I came across Tony Robbins. And so I remember the first time I heard Les Brown speak, and then I heard Tony Robbins speak. I was like, oh, I could totally do that. Like I could impact the world. And it just awakened this hunger in me. And I think if I look back on it now, based on the state that I'm in now, it created this desire that I think a part of me at that time was still seeking validation and worth
Mm-hmm.
externally, especially coming out of the church, and,
Yeah.
some of the things do attach to you, and I was like, I don't need the church, I can do it this way. And
Yeah.
I don't have to be associated with religion. I don't have to be associated with anything. I can create my own space. And if people hear me, they're going to follow and they're going to listen. Well, going into that, I became a speaker, I became a coach, and for years I wouldn't charge for it because I knew coming out of the space, like selling drugs and being in that lifestyle, my relationship with the energy of money was not in a great place. I knew that if I started making a lot of money fast, it was possible that the money would control me. And
Mhm.
I said, I want to get firm in knowing and trusting my ability to truly lead and guide people. And I want to get to a place where I can have money, but money doesn't have me.
Beautifully
And
self-aware.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like, that's where I've always stayed, but even fast forwarding, I ended up moving to Arizona in 2010 from Virginia. And the vision, I actually woke up one morning. How I ended up here was I woke up one morning and I heard the audible word Arizona, just like that, Arizona.
Yeah.
And my oldest kid's mom and we were the only two people at home. And we were looking to move at that time, actually. And we had been looking at Florida, Georgia. Never in my life would I ever imagine I end up in Arizona. But we were looking at East Coast, Northeast, Southeast. But we just wanted to get out of Virginia, have a fresh start. And so that morning that happened, I go into the living room. She's on the laptop and she says, wow, these houses are really inexpensive right now. And this is right around the time that the market had crashed and all that stuff has happened. So rent was very cheap, finding
Yeah.
places, it wasn't expensive at all, especially here in Arizona. And I was like, where, Georgia? Because that's where we were looking the night before. And she was like, no, Arizona. And I just
Oh,
kind of sat
boom.
there and I was like, did you just say something like about Arizona or anything like before I came out here? And she said, no. Why? And I was like, no reason. I just kind of sat with it. But after that day, everywhere that I would go, I would hear something about Arizona, turn the TV on and to be something about Arizona. I would be in Virginia driving down the road and there would be a car passing me with an Arizona license plate.
Princeton,
Or,
go to Arizona.
yeah. Yeah. So about 6 months went by. And at this time, I'm like, okay, I'm not pastoring anymore. I'm not making a lot of money. I'm like, I'm still traveling and speaking and doing speaking engagements and stuff like that. But I was like, okay, well, how am I going to end up there? And my spirit was just like, that is not your concern. And at this point, I had so much faith. It wasn't in what I could do because so many doors had been opened up for me that I didn't have to fight to get through.
Yeah.
I just had to listen and discern my way through. And so about 6 months later, I'm laying in bed. I'm frustrated because, of course, Arizona keeps coming to me. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's like I got shaken from within. I'm laying there. I remember the lamp on beside the bed. I'm just laying on my back. And all of a sudden, this voice again, get up and find somewhere to live
Yeah.
in Arizona. And so I get jumped up. I had my laptop on the corner of my dresser and I'm sitting there and I look up, I think it was rentalhouses.com or something like that. I forget. It was a rental link. And I just put in Arizona. And one of the first properties that came up, it said, move in now, no deposit, no down payment, all fees covered. And I was like, no way, no way
Yeah.
that this is there. Long story short, we ended up moving because I have to keep saying long story short because there is so much in here, guys. So
Yeah.
bear with me. But I ended up filling out the application. Up at this point, my credit, as far as I knew, was crap. And that was another thing that I was frustrated about because I hadn't been smart. I've been living off credit cards. Credit was bad. Well, I get on here and then I fill out all the information and then it has to take me through a credit report. And I was like, here we go. I
Hmm.
fill out the information. I pull up my credit report and it says, keep in mind, last time I checked my credit, it was like 497, 525. I pull my credit up and it was 723, 713, and 705. And I was like, what? Like,
Wow.
how did this happen? And I'm in Arizona now. So clearly, following that situation, we ended up, I got on the phone the next day. The lady who had put the ad up in that on that site, she said, yeah, my husband and I, we found a home, but we have a 9-month lease that we're still under, and we don't want to be paying for two locations. So if you get approved, we'll pay for your application fee, we'll pay your deposit, we'll pay everything. We just need you to come here and take it over.
This is what I love, Princeton, because so many people will hear that powerful inner voice of knowing and then overlay it with these beliefs like, oh, but I don't this, or, my credit rating, whatever it might be, instead of just following and letting it unfold in what feels like miraculous ways.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And they stop themselves because of that. And this is a powerful story, just really demonstrating that every time you're listening to that inner voice and just taking one step and another step, it just keeps opening for you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes doesn't make sense. Like when you're looking at your credit rating going, what the, how? Or that there's someone there that's in that situation and you don't have to pay these fees. I think that's a powerful message for people. Just listen to it and
Yeah, you
see where it
have to
takes
move.
you,
Yeah,
you
you
know?
have to move because there are going to be moments. We all talk about the dark night of the soul
Oh, yeah.
moments. And I don't think that there are negative moments. I think those are probably the most beautiful moments because it's in the darkness that you learn to shine the brightest. And so you will go through those moments. You will experience those moments where it's like the teacher's not talking anymore. None of the answers are coming. And I always say it's like exam time. We all have our own life path curriculum. The teacher's teaching you the entire year. There's going to be pop quiz moments. Those are those moments that seem to come up out of nowhere. Then there's going to be the quizzes that you are prepared for. The teacher tells you, all right, this is coming up. This is about to happen. Be mindful. It's a part of the syllabus. When your
Yeah.
tests are going to come, and the teacher says, okay, sometimes I'm going to give you a test in one of three ways. Either you're going to do the test by yourself, or I'm going to let you work with a partner. These are the moments when people are drawn into your life to walk with you on the journey at times.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be moments where it's just open book, where the teacher just says, here you go. Here's the answer.
Yeah.
But you have to surrender to the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't just stop. If I look at it like high school, I can't stop in first semester or the first 6 weeks of the year, of the curriculum and say, I don't want to move on anymore. I don't want to move on. I don't want to move on. The teacher's going to be on you. The educational system is going to be on you. All of a sudden, everything's going to start. You can't participate in certain things, certain sports, certain activities anymore because your grades are too low. You have to continue the process. And this is why for so many people, it feels like everything is being stripped away from them because somewhere in the curriculum, they've said, I don't want to move from here anymore.
Could
But
you
you have
imagine
to
being the
keep moving.
baby in the darkness of the womb going, I'm not going to be born?
Right.
You know what
Perfect
I mean?
analogy.
You're in that darkness and it's where everything's being created.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't then go, well, I'm not going to be born. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to come through that channel and out into the world.
The
Change.
thing is, you're not something much greater than you outside of the womb of this experience we call life placed you here to give birth to something. And whether you like it or not, the contractions are eventually going to come.
Yeah.
The contractions are going to come and life is going to say, you can't stay here anymore. You can't stay here, and you can fight to hold on all you want. The more you fight, it's like the saying, whatever you resist persists. If you continue to resist it, the contractions get tighter and tighter and tighter, and the spiritual womb continues to open and open and open. And then finally you reach a point, if you surrender, where it feels like all of a sudden all the doors open. No, it's just like your life completely dilated. You were prepared in the womb, and spirit has been saying, life has been saying, source has been saying, you're ready. You're ready.
When we understand the landscape and how those experiences are communicating to us, when we understand that language and we understand the landscape, it's easier to surrender because you'll still feel uncomfortable, but traveling side by side with that is also that knowing of, oh, I know exactly where I am right now. Do you know what I mean? And this
Yes.
too will pass. Yeah.
Yes. You look at 99% of everything you've ever experienced, besides, because we haven't, I only say 99% because we haven't crossed over yet. That's the 1% that has not happened to you yet. 99% of everything that you thought you wouldn't make it through, you've made it through. And so the process continues. And this is why I love that you brought up surrender again, because a lot of people, you'll hear them say, I just struggle with surrendering. And I tell them, no, you don't struggle with surrendering. You surrender to fear. You surrender to worry. You surrender to doubt. You surrender to frustration. You surrender to anger. You surrender to the victim state of mind. You surrender to all these things that don't honor you. It's time to start surrendering to the belief that you are powerful beyond measure. It's time to start surrendering to the vision that you have been given. It's time to start surrendering to the opportunities that are in front of you that you must become a wiser, more efficient version of you in order to step into. It's time to start surrendering into the higher sense of self that you are, because you've been surrendering to the vessel instead of bringing the vessel into subjection. And that's
Princeton,
where people are stuck.
If that's not washing through everybody that's listening, that was just washing through me. And what a beautiful and profound way to put it, to point out where people have already been surrendering.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And so you ended up in the I suppose, personal development, but you're now going through a different transition from that personal development realm.
Yeah. So
back into something new, or something old, or something deeper.
Much deeper, much deeper. The journey definitely prepared me. I moved to Arizona, and the first message that came to me prior to moving to Arizona was, I'm taking you to a desert place because you are a desert bloom. In the desert, you are going to grow through more intensity, more heat, more pressure than you ever have in your life. And I remember having this vision of this beautiful bloom growing out of the desert, like parched earth, and it just looked like a flame. And that message is what came with it. And so following that, moved to Arizona. A year after being in Arizona, my oldest kid's mom and I ended up getting separated. So now I'm by myself. I grew through 3 years because I stopped speaking, stopped coaching, everything for 3 years, because following that experience, I felt so much judgment against myself. I felt like I had failed as a father, failed as a husband. I knew that I had made the right decision to end our marriage because we were just on two completely different paths. She wasn't into the spiritual stuff, and she would vocalize that a lot of the times. But, I told her, I love you enough to let you go. I don't want to wake up 65, 75 years old wondering what we did with our lives because we settled due to circumstance. I want you to find your joy. I want you to find your peace. And I always tell people, I learned how to love unconditionally in that relationship. But following that experience, I realized something. I realized that I knew who Princeton was in my purpose. I knew who Princeton was as a father. I knew who Princeton was as a husband. But what I didn't know, because I got married really young prior to my life ever changing, what I didn't know is, who am I as a single man?
Yeah.
And that hit me so deep. And then I started dealing with emotional detachment because I was used to waking up and having all these people around me all the time. And now majority of the time, other than when I had my kids, I was by myself. And this is really when I found the power of peace at a whole nother level, because being married when my life changed, I still always had people around me. So there were certain things that I didn't have to face. And to this, the reason I'm sharing this right now is that there are some of you growing through experiences in your life where maybe for the first time you are feeling completely isolated. There's nobody to turn to seek solace. It's like life has put you specifically by yourself. And it is in these moments that you will learn to really either own your power or continue to surrender to a lack of self-worth, continue to surrender to a lack of self-doubt, a lack of self-belief. And this is where you're going to learn to love yourself the deepest, because the one person that will always be with you is you. And these moments provide an opportunity for you to meet yourself at a deeper level. And so I took 3 years. I stepped away because that's
amazing. Sorry to cut you off there, but when I walked away from my 14-year relationship, because I got married young and I had my 3 children, I took 3 years. I didn't date. I wasn't sexually intimate with anybody. I took 3 years to turn my vision inwards and to develop that relationship, to confront rather than to avoid. So it's fascinating to hear someone else go, I took 3 years
Yeah.
um, exploring. Yeah. Self.
And it was beautiful. Like taking the 3 years was a gift because coming out of it, I got clear in my vision. And I always said, I'll never be a hypocrite. I know that I can't take somebody somewhere that I've never been. And
Mhm.
so I didn't want to put myself in the sacred space of other people's lives, knowing that I was facing an opportunity to grow that I was avoiding. You know, I wanted to be the example because when I started years prior, I knew that with every one thing that I could overcome and face, there was at least a million people out there growing through or facing that same challenge or test in their own life. And
Yeah.
so I always owned my challenges. I owned my tests. And this one was just so deep that I had to step away and give myself permission to kind of take that hiatus. And coming out of that, that's when I met my youngest daughter's mom. And I had started, prepping to speak and start coaching again. And we started moving forward, and fast forward, we were together for 9 years. We're still amazing friends and we have a great relationship, but that was just another relationship. It feels like I outgrew so many different things. And I also learned in that relationship, not because I learned unconditional love, but in that relationship, I learned how to love me at a deeper level because I was coming out of a relationship, and what came up in that relationship and mirrored to me was because I would still had some feelings that I had failed my marriage. Even when things came up that were out of alignment, I felt like I had to fix it and solve the problem so that this didn't end. And so we ended up actually being together longer than we should have been based on the situations that we were in. And so finally we came to a point where it was like, okay, like same situation. I love you enough to let you continue your journey. If we are meant to cross paths again, or
Yeah.
clearly we're going to be in each other's lives because she's the mother of my 3-year-old, you
Sometimes it's
know,
a completion, not so much an
mhm.
ending or a failure. It's just a completion of why you
Yes.
came together.
Yes, everything. One of my favorite poems is A Season, a Reason, or a Lifetime. And
Yeah.
it talks about, every person comes into your life for a reason, some for a season, some for a lifetime. But it's not so much about how long they are there, it's about the gift of what they bring you while they're there. And
Beautiful.
so I read that years ago and I saw the video years ago. And so it's very easy for me to navigate those situations now. But coming out of that 2000, this was actually prior to that, but 2017, I decided, okay, Princeton Clark coaching, I'm letting that go. I'm feeling this evolution happening. And so I decided to rebrand into Evolved Mastery, evolving through self mastery.
Mhm.
And I wrote my first book, Awakening Your Inner Master, The Journey of Self Mastery. And I basically channeled that entire book. I sat down, and initially, once I launched the brand, got the LLC, got the business and everything set up, I said, in order to launch this new brand, I have to have something to launch it off of. And I said, okay, I'll do an ebook. And so I sat down. The first night, I wrote over 10,000 words. This was without an outline, a syllabus of what it was going to be about, anything. I
Yeah.
just said, okay, evolved mastery, self mastery. What are the three components of self mastery? Mind, body, and soul. And once that hit, it's like it opened up this vortex above my head, and I just started typing and typing and typing. I realized that night it wasn't just going to be an ebook. And altogether in hours, it probably took me about 48 hours to write the book and finish it. And that's chapters, each part, mind, body,
Wow.
soul, the entire thing. And a year later, I published the book in January of 2020. And then I got hired in that February to work for Tony Robbins as one of his mastery coaches, and Dean Graziosi as well. And that's where I thought I was on the peak. I was at the mountain. I was on the mountaintop. Got to meet Tony again in person. And I remember him asking me one day, he said, "How is your business going?" And I said, "Oh man, I haven't even really been focusing on my business. I've just been in it, serving, learning as much as I can learn about the industry." And he looks at me and he says, "Never sacrifice your vision for another man's vision." He said, "I've always admired someone who was really in the work, and clearly you're passionate about it." He said, "But never sacrifice your vision for another man's vision."
Yeah.
At that same time, I had started feeling very unsettled there. And another message came to me. I was angry, I was frustrated, and I couldn't figure out why. And for some of you listening, you may be in this stage in your life now where Things finally started working out for you, and you're like, why? Like, why don't I have peace? Like, why can't I just be happy? And it's because you're coming up to an ending.
Yeah.
You've been there way too long. You've been there longer than what you were supposed to be there for. The lessons have been learned and you're still holding on to it because you've gotten comfortable there. And so I had gotten comfortable in this space, and I went home and I meditated one day, and my spirit was just like, open your mouth, because so much was out of alignment. As much as I was learning, I saw the inner workings of that industry and it was out of alignment with my spirit.
Yeah.
I saw how people were being used, and, how they were being used as cash cows, basically just taking their money. I saw how they would create one program and then create another program, or not really even. They would take that same program, add a little bit to it, and introduce it as a new program. So people thought they were paying for an entirely new program, and they weren't. And they would do this over and over and over again. So in the personal and professional development space, I tell people all the time, you are better off buying books on specific topics that you want to learn than investing thousands of dollars to go hear someone tell you what you could literally watch in a YouTube video. Because they've put it out so many times. If they've written books, 9 times out of 10, if they've created programs, most of these programs that people are buying are nothing more than regurgitations of the same programs. And then they get all their buddies together and they take bits and pieces of all the things that they've already taught. And then they create a bigger program and charge more for that. But it's all a regurgitation of the same thing. You don't have to pay that much money. This is where I realized the spiritual space is completely different. And this is what led me, I ended up walking away from that space with Tony and Dean, started really focusing on entrepreneurs and really creating a space where we could dive deeper, because one of the biggest problems that I saw also in that space was you jump people into these programs, but most of these people don't even know whether they're going right or left. Most of these people don't even know themselves yet. And so you're skipping them, and then you're telling them if they don't succeed, it's their fault. While partially that's true, it's also your responsibility as a leader, as a guide, as I see it. If you are a true conscious leader and guide, it's your responsibility to discern and be aware whether or not the people that you say you serve and love so much are prepared to utilize the information that you are giving. And so I saw a lot of that being completely ignored. And that's why I said, okay, this is not for me. And the message came to me again. I only brought you here because you said you wanted to be here. But this was only a stopping point in your journey, because what I needed you to realize is that where I am taking you is so much more than this.
You need the experience to take out of it. And also I always feel we need moments to be somewhere to go, this is not in alignment with my deepest values. Mm-hmm. This is not soul aligned. Yes, I'm meant to be here because I've got to recognize something, but no, I'm not meant to stop here. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like going back to school. Like, you don't start kindergarten to stay in kindergarten. You don't go through elementary school to stay in elementary school. There are levels to it. And in every new level, you're going to meet a version of you that you've never met before. And so you have to continue the process and understand that there are going to be those moments where life says, okay, you want this? There's a reason why you really want it. I'm going to let you go into it because there's lessons on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to bring you out of it. If you're willing to listen, if you're willing to let go of the attachment to the idea and really just see it as a part of your journey, I'm going to bring you out of it. But if you get attached to it, you're going to make this space of stress and strain longer than really what it needs to be. And then many times what people call the dark night of the soul, it's really not the dark night of the soul. It's that you've gotten so dim in your light because you've stayed in a place that you were never meant to stay for a long period of time. And now it's just getting dark around you because little by little, your inspiration is dimming. That inner spark is getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer.
I think that's really important what you've just pointed out there, Princeton. Just because you're in a dark space doesn't mean it's the initiation transformation process of the dark night of the soul, which is really a dismantling and a rearranging of self. And it's very different from just being in a dark place. So would you say the work that you're sort of moving into now is not just concepts, it's that healing journey of turning someone's vision inwards and taking them into themselves, that spiritual journey that does encompass mindset and emotional intelligence and everything else, but it brings soul and soul awareness and inner knowing into the process as well, and that dismantling of the masks and facades that we all put on.
100%. The personal professional development space is very limited. It's very limited. It's going to deal with the branches of your life, but not take you to the root of what's creating that life. And I was allowed to go into those different spaces. I can talk branding, I can talk business building, I can talk entrepreneurship, all these different levels of building businesses, networking, creating impact till I'm blue in the face. But what I've realized is that that's not enough. I was allowed to go into those spaces to see what was missing. And what's missing is the spiritual work. And I've been saying for years now, you can't even talk personal and professional development until you talk spiritual development. And so now I'm navigating back into, or I am in the space of really getting back to hosting retreats and guiding people back to that inner space of their soul. So I'm starting the Rejuvenated Soul retreats, and it's all about regaining that inner spark, regaining that energy, regaining that vigor, regaining the vision for your life, and healing at a deep level in a very intimate atmosphere. And what I love about the idea of moving back into retreats is it's a very intimate space that I get to cultivate with people, and they get to come in anywhere between 3 to 5 days and get out of the noise, reconnect, be vulnerable, share. And I get to bring in, my friends and partners and other healers that are in the space to really facilitate that piece for them in a way that's going to expedite their growth, because they're going to have a container.
And I have two words that just keep coming to mind while you're talking about it, because I facilitate in retreats and things as well, and have done, and new ones coming up myself, but support and safety. With the work that the likes of you and I are doing, it is creating that support and that safety to go into those places and those spaces and come out different, come out renewed.
Yes.
Yeah. So you work with men and you work with women?
Men and women, yes. Actually, I was telling a friend earlier today, most of my clients have always been women. I can literally count, although I've worked with men and spoken on stages in front of men, personally, one-on-one, I can count on one hand how many men have paid me to work with me. Most of my clients over the past 20 years of doing this work have been women. And I understand. For a while, I didn't understand it. And I understood with it. What I did understand, let me say it this way. What I did understand was there was a huge responsibility that I had. And I remember even hosting my first event, and mostly women came. And I told them, I said, when you hear me speak, understand that it is not this. It's not my body. You're going to feel an attraction, but understand that what you are being attracted to is not Princeton. Maybe a small percentage, but what you're going to feel is a recognition of your spirit between my spirit. You're going to recognize an aspect of yourself mirroring back to you through me. And I really just need you to surrender to that, and I really just wanted to create a sacred space for that. I had 2 sisters growing up. I was raised by primarily women, and I just always have had this reverence for women. And I feel like there's a space where a lot of women have never been given a safe space by men.
Yeah.
And I really just want to create that space. I work with men. If men came to me right now and said, I'm ready, I want to go deeper, which it does happen. Actually, since I started moving back into this space, I've had more men reaching out to me saying, man, I need this. I'm ready for this. But I just feel within my being in the beginning, it's going to be mostly women that are drawn to it, because they're in that space where it's more natural for them to be vulnerable when they feel safe than it is for men.
I think when we spoke at one point too, and you were talking about that, and I was saying, it makes perfect sense to me, because women need to be in that environment where they do feel that sense of safety held by the masculine. And so we're going to have, at the bottom of your episode, we're going to have your website link so people can connect with you from there, your books, your retreats, and find out more about what you do. But what would be your one, I mean, God, you've given so many gems in this, but, your one final gift that you'd like to leave for the listeners, Princeton?
The one thing that I would like to leave, if this is the last thing I could say to any person on this planet, is that before you were ever in this existence of this space we call time, the space that we call life, you had a purpose. Before you had a name, you had a purpose. I always say that we are seeds sown into this earth. And if you understand a seed never has to fight to be what it already is. It goes into the dirt, it goes into the darkness, it surrenders to that darkness, and it takes root. And it's in that darkness that it begins to break free from that shell. What you have faced in your life never came to break you free, or never came to break you. It came to break you free. And it may feel like everything around you is breaking right now, but surrender to the breaking, because it's only removing the shell. It's only removing the shell so that you can take root and grow into being exactly everything you already are. You don't have to fight to be what you are. You just have to surrender to the knowing that you are it and trust the process.
Oh, and let that one land. Oh my gosh, Princeton, like so many of my guests, we could just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Thank you for how open you've been, for just so much wisdom brought forth. Like I said, I think, it's another episode people might listen more than once, and sometimes I say to people, listen to a podcast like this with your eyes closed and feel it as much as listening to it. Because the power of spirit, coming from you, and the power of heart and compassion and understanding and love needs to be felt and experienced as much as it needs to be heard. So I really thank you for your time. And like I said, your details will be at the bottom of the explanation of this particular podcast. But until this one comes out, I will be sitting here constantly championing you and what you're doing. And I'm so glad that the divine has brought you back into the spiritual platform with the plethora of knowledge and experience that you have. I'm excited to sit on the sidelines and continue to watch what's happening with you and what you're doing. And, blessings to you, Princeton. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And this is a great work we get to do together. So I'm looking forward to the journey ahead, and hopefully having you at one of my retreats, or maybe I'll come out to Australia and we'll have a retreat out there together.
Beautiful, beautiful. Love collaborations. Wow, thank you.
Wow.
Join me on my next episode. And if you love this podcast, please subscribe by clicking on the plus button if you're on Apple, or like and follow on Spotify, rate and review, and please share Inner Voice of Knowing with your friends.